My name is Rachel Morrison. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my life, I thought being someone's daughter meant they wanted the best for you. I thought when my parents opened that college fund the day I was born, it meant they saw a future worth investing in. I thought the spreadsheets they showed me every birthday, the ones with numbers climbing steadily year after year, meant I was building towards something they believed in. But there's a difference between being invested in and being invested for. And I learned that difference the hard way when I found out my $80,000 college fund, the one my grandparents had started and my parents had promised to protect, had been completely drained to fund my brother's second failed business attempt. The business that lasted exactly 9 months before he declared bankruptcy and moved back into our parents' basement like nothing had happened. I told myself to stay calm when I found out. I told myself money was just money, that education could be earned other ways, that maybe my parents had a good reason I didn't understand yet. But the night my mother looked me in the eye and said, "You're a girl. Your husband will pay for your education. Your brother needed a real investment," something inside me went completely still. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't cry into my pillow like I'd done so many times before when my brother got the car I'd been promised or the bedroom I'd been told would be mine. I just finally understood that in my family, my future had always been considered temporary, a placeholder, something that could be sacrificed the moment my brother's dreams needed funding. And when I worked 3 jobs to put myself through college anyway, when I graduated with honors and became a CPA, when I built a career they never thought I could build without their help, I didn't send them updates or brag or demand apologies. I just lived. I lived well. I lived carefully. I lived in a way that proved the daughter they underestimated was worth more than the son they bankrupted themselves trying to save. Then, 12 years after they took my education fund, my mother called asking for a loan, not to apologize, not to explain, to ask for money. Because my brother's second business had failed, and apparently the daughter whose future didn't matter was now the emergency fund they'd forgotten, had a heartbeat. Before I tell you what I said to my mother that made her go completely silent for 11 seconds, and before I tell you what my brother said when he realized I had the bank statements from the college fund they thought I'd never see, tell me this. What time is it for you right now? And where are you watching from? I'm curious how far this story will travel because what happened next taught me that sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying someone's life. It's building yours so well that they finally see what they threw away. The night I found out about the college fund started like any other Tuesday in my senior year of high school. I was 17, sitting at the kitchen table with college brochures spread across the surface like a map of possible futures. I had good grades, decent test scores, and an acceptance letter from a state university that would cost about $22,000 a year for tuition, room, and board. My parents had always said the college fund would cover it. They'd shown me the statements. They'd told me since I was 10 years old that I didn't need to worry, that they'd been planning for this, that the money was there. My mother was washing dishes. My father was reading the newspaper in his chair. My brother Derek, 22 years old and living at home after dropping out of community college twice, was in the basement playing video games loud enough that I could hear the gunfire through the floor. I asked my mom when we should schedule a meeting with the financial aid office to discuss how the fund transfer would work. She stopped washing dishes. The water kept running, but her hands went still. My father's newspaper crinkled as he turned the page, but he didn't look up. That should have been my first warning. Silence in my house was never neutral. It was always the pause before bad news dressed up as reasonable decisions. My mother turned off the water, dried her hands on a towel, and said we needed to talk about college expenses. She sat down across from me with that expression she always wore when she was about to explain why something I wanted wasn't practical. My father finally lowered his newspaper. Derek turned down his game volume, which meant he was listening from the basement because he always paid attention when conversations involved money he thought he might get. My mother said the college fund situation had changed. She said there had been some unexpected expenses over the last few years. She said they'd had to make difficult choices as a family. Then she said the fund balance was lower than they'd originally planned. I asked how much lower. She said it would cover maybe 1 semester. Maybe. My stomach dropped. I asked what happened to the rest. My father cleared his throat and said Derek had needed help with a business opportunity, a real chance to build something, an investment that would pay off for the whole family. I stared at both of them. I asked if they were telling me they'd given my college fund to Derek for a business. My mother corrected me like I was being dramatic at a dinner party. She said they hadn't given it. They'd invested it. In family success, in Derek's future, in something that would benefit everyone if it worked. I asked what kind of business. My father said Derek had partnered with a friend to open a specialty car detailing service, high-end clients, luxury vehicles, premium products. They'd needed startup capital for equipment, a lease on a garage space, marketing, insurance, supplies. I asked how much they'd given him. My mother hesitated. Then she said most of it. I asked her to define most. She said $74,000 out of $80,000, leaving me with $6,000 for a 4-year degree that would cost nearly $90,000. I sat there doing math in my head that didn't make sense no matter how I calculated it. I asked why they didn't talk to me first. My father said I was a minor. It was their decision. I asked what happened if Derek's business failed. My mother's face tightened. She said I was being negative. She said Derek was finally taking initiative. She said I should be supportive of my brother instead of worrying about money that was meant to help the family. That phrase, meant to help the family, as if I wasn't part of the family, as if my education wasn't a family investment worth protecting. I asked if they had a plan for how I was supposed to pay for college now. My father said there were scholarships, loans, work-study programs. I could go to community college first, save money, transfer later. My mother added that I'd probably get married someday anyway, and my husband would have a degree and a good job, so it wasn't like I needed to worry about career advancement the way Derek did. I will never forget that sentence. You'll probably get married anyway. Like my education was optional because someday a man might pay my bills. Like my degree was decorative instead of necessary. Like my future was something that would be handled by someone else, so why waste family money on it when Derek's dreams needed funding? I didn't argue that night. I didn't throw the brochures. I didn't scream that it was unfair or beg them to reconsider. I just went to my room, closed the door, and stared at the ceiling until my eyes burned. Then I started planning. The next morning, I went to my school counselor and asked about every scholarship, every grant, every program that could help pay for college without my parents' money. I applied to 43 different funding sources over the next 4 months. I wrote essays, I submitted transcripts, I filled out forms until my hands cramped. I got a part-time job at a grocery store, then picked up weekend shifts at a coffee shop, then started tutoring students in math 3 nights a week. I worked every available hour outside of school. I saved every paycheck. I opened a bank account my parents didn't know about and protected it like my life depended on it. Because it did. Derek's business lasted exactly 9 months. I watched it happen from a distance, the way you watch a car accident in slow motion. First, the excitement. The social media posts about grand openings and premium services. The photos of Derek in a polo shirt with the company logo standing next to expensive cars. My parents bragging at family gatherings about how their son was an entrepreneur. Then the silence. The posts stopped. The bragging got quieter. My mother started saying the economy was tough. My father started saying Derek was learning valuable lessons. Then one night at dinner, my mother mentioned casually that Derek's business partner had moved to another state, that the lease on the garage had ended, that Derek was taking some time to figure out his next steps. I asked if that meant the business had closed. My father said it was more of a pause, a restructuring. I asked if they'd gotten any of the $74,000 back. My mother looked at me like I'd said something cruel. She said business investments were risks. She said I wouldn't understand because I never tried to build anything. I almost laughed. I was working 3 jobs to build a future they'd sold to fund my brother's failure. Derek moved back into the basement, the same basement he'd been living in before the business started. He got a part-time job at an electronics store that lasted 6 weeks before he quit because the manager didn't respect his ideas. Then he stayed home playing video games and talking about his next business concept while I worked overnight shifts at a diner to save money for textbooks. I got into college with a partial academic scholarship, 2 small grants, and a work-study position that covered maybe half my costs. The rest I borrowed. Student loans with interest rates that made me sick every time I calculated the total. But I went. I moved into the smallest dorm room on campus with 2 roommates and furniture that looked like it had survived 3 decades of college students. And I studied like my life depended on proving something. Because it did. I worked during the school year, I worked during summers, I worked during winter breaks, I worked during spring breaks when my roommates went to beaches and posted photos of freedom I couldn't afford. I studied accounting because the numbers made sense in a way people never did. I liked that debits and credits had to balance. I liked that you couldn't lie to a ledger for long before the truth showed up in black and red. I liked that financial statements didn't play favorites. They just showed reality. And after 4 years of reality, I graduated with honors, a job offer from a mid-sized accounting firm in another state, and $60,000 in student loan debt that I would be paying off for the next decade. My parents came to my graduation. They sat in the audience and clapped when my name was called. My mother cried. My father took photos. Derek didn't come because he had an interview for a sales position that he never mentioned again, which meant it probably didn't happen. After the ceremony, my parents took me to dinner at a chain restaurant where my mother told everyone at nearby tables that her daughter had just graduated college. She didn't mention that I'd paid for it myself. She didn't mention the $74,000 they'd given my brother instead of me. She didn't apologize for telling me my education didn't matter, because I'd probably just get married. She just smiled and ordered dessert and acted like she'd supported me the whole time. I moved 6 hours away from my job. I rented a small apartment, bought secondhand furniture, and learned which grocery stores had the best sales. I set up automatic payments for my student loans. I built an emergency fund. I started contributing to a 401k. I did everything my parents should have taught me but didn't because they'd been too busy funding my brother's dreams. And slowly, month by month, year by year, I built a life they'd never thought I could build without their money. Meanwhile, back home, Derek tried and failed at 2 more business ideas. First, a dropshipping company that lasted 4 months before he realized profit margins were smaller than YouTube videos made them look. Then a cryptocurrency trading course he tried to sell online before he understood that people don't buy financial advice from someone living in their parents' basement. My parents kept covering his expenses, kept paying for his car insurance, his phone bill, his health insurance, his credit card minimums. Kept treating his failures like learning experiences, while my success went mostly unmentioned because I'd done it without them, which somehow made it less valuable in their eyes. I didn't call home often. I didn't visit for most holidays. I sent polite text messages on birthdays and Christmas. I kept my life separate from theirs because every conversation felt like walking into a room where I was still the daughter whose future didn't matter as much as my brother's next idea. Then I met someone. His name was Jordan Chen. He was a software engineer, quiet in a confident way, and he did something my family had never done well. He listened. When I told him I didn't talk to my family much, he didn't push for details like gossip. He just said, "Then I hope the people in your life now treat you better than they did." That sentence stayed with me longer than any compliment. We dated for 2 years before getting engaged. He had a good job, no debt, and a savings account that proved he understood how money worked. We were planning a small wedding, something we could pay for ourselves, something that didn't require asking my parents for anything. Around that time, I got promoted to senior accountant. The raise wasn't huge, but it was real. It came with more responsibility, better benefits, and the kind of professional respect I'd worked years to earn. I started making real progress on my student loans. I bought a reliable car. I moved into a nicer apartment. I built the kind of stable, debt-free life my parents had always said I'd need a husband to provide, except I'd built it myself. And the husband I'd found wasn't paying my bills. He was building alongside me, 2 people with futures they'd earned instead of borrowed. For the first time in my life, my days were not organized around being worth less than Derek. They were mine. And while I was building a life my family couldn't touch, back home, their perfect little world built on my stolen education fund was starting to crumble in ways they couldn't ignore. I didn't find out all at once. That's how family disasters usually work. They don't arrive with one clear announcement. They leak through old friends, half-finished text messages, awkward social media posts, and relatives who think they're whispering when they're really handing you a whole timeline. Derek, at 34 years old, had tried to start another business, this time a consulting company helping other people start businesses. The irony was so thick I almost choked when I heard it. A man who'd failed at every business he'd touched was going to teach other people how to succeed. He'd borrowed money from my parents again, not from a college fund this time, because there wasn't one left to drain. From their retirement savings, the money they'd been planning to use for their future. He'd promised this time was different. This time he had a real plan. This time he'd pay them back with interest. The consulting company lasted 6 months before the clients he'd promised never materialized, and the business partner he'd found disappeared with most of the startup equipment. Derek filed for bankruptcy. Not his first time, apparently. He'd filed once before, after the car detailing business, and never told our parents the full extent of the debt. This time, the bankruptcy was bigger, more complicated, more expensive. And it meant my parents, who had co-signed on some of his business loans thinking they were helping family, were now partially liable for debts they couldn't afford. My father had health problems. Nothing dramatic like a movie scene. Just high blood pressure, medication, doctor visits, tests that insurance didn't fully cover. The kind of slow medical expenses that add up month after month until you look at your savings and realize it's half what it used to be. My mother had taken early retirement from her teaching job because of stress, which meant less income, which meant tighter budgets, which meant the retirement savings they'd dipped into for Derek's last business were even more critical now. Except those savings were mostly gone. They'd spent decades building that fund. Small deposits, careful planning, compound interest, and they drained it funding my brother's 4th failed business attempt. The house they lived in, the one my father used to call his greatest investment, suddenly had a second mortgage. They'd refinanced to cover Derek's debts and their own mounting expenses. The car my mother drove was 12 years old and making noises that meant expensive repairs were coming. The furnace needed replacing, the roof had leaks. Their carefully planned retirement was turning into a financial emergency they couldn't admit out loud. And Derek? Derek was back in the basement. Again, talking about his next idea. Again, blaming the economy, bad partners, bad timing, bad luck. Never blaming his own choices. Never acknowledging the hundreds of thousands of dollars my parents had poured into his dreams while I'd paid for my own. I heard all of this through my aunt, my mother's sister, who called me one afternoon and said, "I think you should know what's happening." She told me everything, the bankruptcy, the co-signed loans, the retirement fund, the second mortgage, the stress, the arguments, the way my mother cried when she thought no one was listening. My aunt said my parents were too proud to ask for help, but she thought I should know because I was doing well, and maybe I could offer some financial advice, or maybe help them create a budget, or maybe something. She didn't say give them money, but it was hanging in the air like smoke. The daughter who'd been told her education didn't matter might be able to save the family that had never saved her. I thanked my aunt for telling me. I didn't commit to anything. I just said I'd think about it. Then I sat in my quiet apartment and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no vindication. Just the kind of clarity that comes when you finally stop carrying weight that was never yours to hold. 3 weeks later, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. I let it ring 4 times while I stared at her name on my screen. Then I picked up. She sounded tired. Older than I remembered. She asked how I was. I said I was fine. She asked about Jordan. I said he was fine. She asked about work. I said it was going well. Then she said she wanted to talk to me about something important, family business, something that affected all of us. I said I was listening. She took a breath. Then she told me Derek was going through a difficult time, that his business had ended badly, that he was dealing with bankruptcy, that it had been very hard on Dad's health and her stress levels, that they were all trying to support each other as a family. I waited. She kept talking. She said they'd been looking at their finances and things were tighter than they'd expected at this stage of life. That retirement was harder to plan when unexpected expenses kept coming up, that they were managing, but it was stressful. I asked her what she needed. Not wanted, needed. She paused. Then she said they were wondering if I might be able to help them out. Nothing huge, just maybe a loan, temporary, just until they got things stabilized. Maybe $20,000, they'd pay me back. Of course they would, with interest if I wanted. They just needed some help right now. Family helps family. I asked her if she remembered the college fund. Silence. I said, Mom, do you remember my college fund? She said, of course she remembered. I asked her if she remembered giving most of it to Derek. She said that was different. That was years ago. That was an investment in family success. I asked her how that investment turned out. She told me I was being cruel. I told her I was being accurate. I asked her if she remembered telling me I didn't need the money because I'd probably just get married and my husband would pay for my education. Her voice got smaller. She said she never meant it that way. I said, then how did you mean it, Mom? She said I was bringing up old hurts instead of focusing on the present. She said the family was going through a hard time and I was the only one doing well enough to help. She said Derek had tried his best. She said Dad's health was at risk from the stress. She said I had a good job, no kids, a fiancé with a good income, and it wouldn't hurt me to help the people who raised me. I asked her if raising me included stealing my education fund. She said they didn't steal it. They used it for family purposes. I asked her if I was part of the family when they made that decision, or was I just the backup plan they'd remember when Derek's dreams ran out of money? She started crying. She said I was being hateful. She said she'd always loved me. She said parents make mistakes, but that doesn't mean I should abandon them when they need help. She said Derek was sorry things hadn't worked out. She said they were all sorry if I felt hurt. If I felt hurt? Not I'm sorry we hurt you, just sorry if I felt a feeling they didn't think was valid. I opened my laptop. I pulled up the file I'd been keeping for 12 years. The college fund statements my father had accidentally emailed me during my senior year of high school. The ones that showed the balance over time, the transfers out, the dates matching Derek's business expenses. I said, Mom, I'm looking at the college fund statements right now from January 2011 to August 2011. I can see every withdrawal, $74,000 in 7 months. All of it went to Derek's car detailing business that failed in 9 months. That money was supposed to pay for my education. Instead, I worked 3 jobs. I took out $60,000 in student loans. I ate ramen for dinner more nights than I can count. I graduated with debt you could have prevented. And you want me to give you $20,000 now because Derek's 4th business failed and you're finally facing the consequences of choosing him over me for my entire life? My mother's crying stopped. The phone went completely quiet. I counted the seconds. 11 seconds of absolute silence. Then she said my name, just my name. Quiet. Almost a whisper. I said, I'm not giving you money, Mom. I'm not loaning you money. I'm not helping Derek. I'm not fixing the financial disaster you created by funding his failures with my future. You made a choice when I was 17. You chose him. You told me my education didn't matter. You told me my husband would pay for it. Well, I paid for it myself. And the life I built without your help is mine, not Derek's emergency fund, mine. She said I was being selfish, that I was punishing them for old mistakes, that Derek was my brother and family comes first. I said, family came first for you when you spent my college fund. It just wasn't my part of the family that mattered. Then I said something I'd been holding for 12 years. You want to know what those 4 words were that I was going to say if you kept pushing? Here they are. You already spent mine. I hung up. My hands were shaking, but not from anger. From something else. Relief, maybe, or the kind of emotional exhale that comes when you finally say the truth you've been carrying like weight in your chest. My mother called back. I didn't answer. She called again. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. I deleted it without listening. My father texted. I didn't respond. Derek sent a long message about how I didn't understand what it was like to take risks and fail. I blocked his number. My aunt called. I answered because she'd been the one to warn me. She said my parents were very upset. She said my mother was crying. She said my father's blood pressure was dangerously high. She said Derek was defensive and angry. She said the whole family was in crisis. I asked her if anyone in the family had considered that I'd been in crisis 12 years ago when they stole my education fund and I had to work 3 jobs to survive. She went quiet. Then she said, "I didn't know it was that bad for you." I said, "Nobody asked." I told her I loved her. I told her I appreciated her trying to help, but I told her I was done being the family emergency fund. I was done being the responsible daughter who fixed problems she didn't create. I was done carrying the weight of Derek's failures and my parents' choices. I told her I was building a life with someone who valued me, and I wasn't going to drain my savings to rescue people who'd never protected mine. She said she understood. She said she was sorry. She said she hoped someday the family could heal. I said, "Maybe, but healing doesn't mean I have to keep bleeding." Word spread through the family. Some relatives sided with my parents, said I was being cold, said family helps family, said I could afford to be generous. Other relatives stayed quiet. A few reached out privately to say they understood, that they'd seen the favoritism for years, that they were glad I'd finally stood up for myself. The family split into camps, Team Rachel versus Team Derek, except it was never really about teams. It was about whether people thought my future had mattered as much as my brother's dreams. My parents didn't call again. Derek didn't either. I heard through my aunt that they'd sold some belongings, that they'd refinanced the house again at a worse interest rate, that Derek had finally gotten a full-time job at a warehouse because bankruptcy meant no one would lend him money for another business, that my mother had gone back to substitute teaching to bring in extra income, that my father's health had stabilized, but he was on more medication, that they were managing. Barely, but managing. I didn't feel good about it. I didn't celebrate their struggles. But I didn't rescue them either. Because rescue would have meant agreeing that my money, my savings, my carefully built financial stability was worth less than my brother's fourth chance at a dream he kept failing. And I was done agreeing to be worth less. 6 months later, Jordan and I got married. Small wedding, close friends, his family. Few cousins from my side who'd supported me. We paid for it ourselves. No debt, no drama, no parents guilt-tripping me about why their names weren't on the invitation list. My aunt came. She hugged me before the ceremony and said, "Your mother is heartbroken. She's not here." I said, "She was invited to be part of my life for 34 years. She chose Derek every time. This is just me finally accepting her choice." My aunt nodded. She didn't argue. She just hugged me tighter and said, "You deserved better?" That sentence almost broke me. Not because it was cruel, because it was true. And sometimes truth hurts more than cruelty because you can't argue with it. I thought I might feel sad that my parents weren't there. Instead, I felt light, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't realize was there until I set it down. I walked down the aisle to a man who'd never asked me to choose between his dreams and mine. I said vows that were about partnership instead of sacrifice. I celebrated with people who'd shown up for me instead of people I'd spent my life trying to prove myself to. And when the night ended, Jordan and I went home to the life we'd built together. No debt, no drama, no family members waiting to turn our success into their emergency fund. What I learned is simple, but it took me years to believe it. You don't owe your future to people who never protected it. You don't owe your savings to people who spent yours without asking. You don't owe explanations to people who never explained why you mattered less. And walking away from people who only value you when they need you isn't cruelty. It's clarity. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't destroying someone's life. It's refusing to let them destroy yours. My parents made a choice when I was 17. They chose my brother's dream over my education. They chose his fourth business over my first chance. They chose to tell me my future was optional. And 12 years later, when they needed my money to fix the consequences of that choice, I finally chose myself. Not with anger, not with hatred, just with 4 words that made my mother go silent for 11 seconds. "You already spent mine." Our team at Revenge Broken Trust works incredibly hard to create powerful, emotional, meaningful stories that teach real lessons about self-worth, family dynamics, boundaries, and what it means to rise above people who underestimated you. This story is completely fictional, created for educational and entertainment purposes, designed to deliver valuable messages about protecting your future when your own family won't, about building a life that proves you are always worth the investment, and about understanding that saying no to people who only value you as an emergency fund is not cruelty, it's survival. So tell me in the comments, if your own family spent your future on someone else's dream and then came back asking for help when that dream failed, would you give them money? Would you forgive them? Or would you choose your peace and protect what you built alone? Because these stories only matter when they remind us that the people who refuse to invest in you don't get to withdraw from you later.